Integrity.
Unprofessional.
Creativity.
Poor quality.
Freedom.
Rejected.
Way of life.
Not mainstream.
Philosophy.
No money.
DIY.
Desperate.
Control.
Untested.
Proactive.
Low budget.
Anonymity.
Inferior.
Entrepreneur.
Unsigned.
I challenge any indie artist to define what indie is, and it's not easy.
There I am, not even 3 years old and already banging away at the drums. That's me, Dave Cool. And yes, that's my real name. When I was 5, my dad started a 50s and 60s rock band. And since my older brother was already the guitarist, I got stuck behind the drums. But it turned out I actually liked it, and went on to play in my own bands as a teenager.
Yeah, I really like listening to the Montreal scene. I like supporting a lot of the Montreal bands.
After several years as an independent musician on the Montreal scene, my ears took a serious beating, leading to a severe condition that forced me to stop playing music. That's when I decided to start my own record label to help out other indie musicians. Along the way, someone looked at my business card, which had indie artist written on it, and they asked me, what does being an indie artist mean? This honest, straightforward question made me realize that I had no easy answer. This set in motion a series of events which led to the making of this film. I felt, who better to define what it means to be an indie artist than the artists themselves and those who work directly with them. I spent the next 18 months traveling over 2,400 miles to interview these artists and industry experts, all to answer that one question.
Why doesn't the adapter work?
No, not that question. What is indie?
Fuck indie.
It's just been so overused that I just picture like really boring music.
I think indie has joined the modern lexicon as another box for HMV to be able to sell bands' music, unfortunately.
Well, I think a lot of people incorporate it, first of all, with indie rock.
When I think of indie, I think indie rock.
Indie rock.
You know, guys playing that crunchy guitar.
Knee-jerk reaction, I think of indie rock music.
I think I resented the word indie for a long time because I had associated it completely with indie rock.
Indie? I think of like some sort of myopic kid with a knapsack who's probably never received or given a blowjob in his life.
Okay, I was a little surprised at some of the initial reactions to the word indie. It seemed that, over time, the word became associated with a specific style of music.
There used to be an indie rock category, and it just, like, indie rock, it was as if indie, when said, was just a shortened version of the expression indie rock. I think that's changed. I think that's maybe like an early 90s suggestion, because now indie is so much more broad an expression.
It no longer has anything to do with style of music.
Indies in the past were, it was almost like a style of music. And now we refer to indies as people who are independent. And it can be any kind of music.
So, being an indie artist doesn't necessarily mean you're an indie rock artist, right?
Indie is not a style of music.
Good. I'm glad that's out of the way. Being an indie artist does not mean that you play a specific style of music. Now let's find out what being indie really means. Wikipedia.org defines indie as short for independent, refers to artistic creations outside of the commercial mainstream without the support of a major record label. This is the classic textbook definition of indie, but I was curious to see if that would hold up during my interviews.
I suppose it really is not being affiliated with the majors in terms of when you're creating the record.
It still has to do with being totally independent from the larger labels.
Not being tied down to any sort of major corporation or having ties to major corporation.
I think if someone's like on, getting paid by a huge corporation, they're not independent.
It's not big budget, it's not glossed over, it's not mainstream.
Being an independent artist means working outside of the mainstream, and it's pretty much as simple as that. The mainstream is the major labels.
Alright, so the traditional definition was holding up in many of the interviews, and I figured, hey, this is going to be easy. But then, this happened.
Strictly speaking, I would say that it's anything that's not part of the majors would be indie. But I think that I see indie even more than that. Like, I think that there's levels,
Well, I suppose if you signed on to a major label, you wouldn't be independent anymore. But I think there are many, many, many levels.
Well, that's where you get to the different levels.
Levels?
Kind of like there's like a spectrum, and there's different. So like at one end you'd have the majors, which is not indie, and at the other hand you'd have somebody who's doing it completely on their own.
Nima raises a very good point. There are actually many levels within the music industry, and it's not that easy to distinguish between an artist who's independent and one who's not. So let's break this down. There are basically 3 categories of artists. First, you have the unsigned artists. These are artists who are not signed to any record label at all. Next, you have the artists who are signed to independent record labels. These labels tend to have small rosters of artists and traditionally operate outside of the major record labels. And finally, you have those 4 major record labels. They are Universal Music Group, Sony BMG, EMI, and Warner Music. These are the corporate giants of the industry, and they control about 70% of the global music market. Now here's where it gets complicated. Many indie labels are distributed by the major labels. And the major labels now even own a lot of the indie labels. So think about that for a minute. If some of the indies are distributed by the majors, and the majors own some of the indies, where do artists draw the line? When are they no longer considered indie?
That's a good question.
It's really difficult to answer.
To me, a real indie is someone who's not signed.
C'est pas le jour où tu signes un contrat que tu signes un pacte avec le diable ou que tu n'es plus indépendant.
There's quite a few of those that they are indie, but their distribution goes through the major label. I'd say that's probably the line where you're not indie anymore.
If an indie is just using a label for distribution, then it could be very similar to having an independent distributor. I'm talking about an artist deal as opposed to a distribution deal.
I don't know, then that's the next question. Are you being distributed by a major or not? There's all of those levels, and I guess it's not an easy answer. Maybe that's why you ask it.
When are you indie, when are you not indie? I don't know if there's really a line of demarcation there.
C'est très, la ligne est très mince. Je pense qu'ultimement, c'est le créateur lui-même ou les créateurs eux-mêmes qui peuvent répondre à la question au final.
I don't know. It's a hard question.
Je réponds pas à la question.
I'm sorry if I'm going like completely all over. I'm so hungover, it's insane.
I don't know. Hey, what do you think?
Honestly, at this point I realized that everyone else was just as confused as I was. maybe I needed to go beyond the traditional definition and see if the actual experience of being an indie artist would help make things clearer.
Yeah, well, number one, control of your own power.
Control.
You call the shots.
Control.
Well, you get complete control of your music.
Control.
Because I'm a control freak.
Definitely for us, creative control.
Well, it's complete control.
I want something the way I want it.
The wonderful advantages of being independent is that you do control your career.
That's it. You can control how you make your record. You can control how it's marketed. You can control everything about it. And I think that's it in a nutshell. And you get to own your masters, which is control too.
Well, I'm thankful that I'll never need to go to court to possess my masters, for instance. Like if I ever want to manufacture a CD, if I ever want to utilize any of my songs that have been recorded in any other format, I never need to fight for the right to do that. That's a perk.
To stifle me. A huge advantage is to be in control on some levels and, on many levels of my artistic integrity, my cultural capital, to be able to shift. I've had radical shifts in my art. To be mainstream, not living on the outskirts of society, a label crazy, radical. And I've had the room to shift radically and to explore and experiment and to pursue different things, and that's been joyous. I want ownership, income, distribution, 2 children. Crazy.
It's about freedom, really, and enjoying, enjoying that freedom, enjoying really responding to my impulses at a really root level creatively.
I think freedom. Freedom to artistically pursue what you're looking for. Lack of the man telling you how you'd have to do it.
Definitely the freedom, the creativity, the flexibility to kind of produce as your instincts and your creativity allows you to produce.
It's kind of nice being able to pick and choose what you do and when you do it, what you wear when you do it.
I suppose it's just a matter of really being able to do what you want.
We want to sing about something, we sing about it. We want to make things sound however we want. That's how it's going to be. It's complete freedom.
I don't know what the fuck. I don't know. Am I allowed to swear?
If you want to say fuck in your songs, you say fuck in your songs.
Can I?
La liberté.
We're very lucky in this business. We can go in our basement, so we can go in some studio and do what we want to do and say what we want to say and put a rated sticker on the record and get this out there. We are free. We can do that. So I think the best part of being independent is just being able to express yourself freely.
I was amazed that during my interviews, not only was everyone saying the same thing, but using the exact same words. Having complete control and artistic freedom were the main advantages to being indie.
Another advantage is being able to really create an infrastructure that works for you. To be able to barter with people, to barter for services, to find different things that can be negotiated, where it's not solely money that's being negotiated or rights that are being negotiated.
Working independently, there's a lot of advantages because you get to be hands-on on all aspects, so it's a learning experience as well.
Say what is this? We can't breathe. Fuck what your mama told you. The nation's air turns to stone. Another white man wins the vote.
But you get a lot of life experience doing it too, because you know how to book, you know how to tour, you know how to interview, you know the ins and outs of the industry. That's a major benefit.
Ça t'amène malheureusement ou heureusement dans certains cas à porter plusieurs chapeaux, mais ça t'amène à mieux comprendre l'ensemble des enjeux de l'industrie puis à faire des meilleurs choix.
Like, I think one of the advantages for me as an indie artist is I've really had to learn how to make decisions and how to decide who to work with and where do I want to put energy and what are some of the ways around. I don't have a lot of money, I don't have a lot of resources, so what are the ways around that?
Oh, absolutely. And you have that wonderful anonymity, which is so nice to have. It's nice to be recognized occasionally in a restaurant or on the street, but it's also much nicer to be able to be where everybody else is and be part of every conversation and not have to deal with playing that part of being the star, which is such a drag.
Ça te permet vraiment d'avancer à ton rythme et de bien planifier, de bien sentir les choses. Il n'y a personne qui te force à faire quoi que ce soit. Et chaque chose que tu fais, tu sais pourquoi tu l'as fait. Et ça donne un sens à tout ce que tu fais, puis ça va beaucoup mieux.
Always looking for redemption and trying to make a house a home.
I think the advantages for doing something in an independent way are endless because people are in this for love of art, absolutely, as a base, because you wouldn't do it otherwise because it's not worth it.
These little girls mean the world to me. Put solid roots on my family tree.
All right, so why wouldn't it be worth it?
Well, money? Can you say money?
It's money.
Money! Money, 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 money. Money!
Obviously, money.
Money. The whole startup cash. It's shit.
It gets really expensive.
Well, it's finances, really.
But not having money sucks.
Funding's definitely a huge obstacle.
Definitely an obstacle.
And I bet you everybody else in all your interviews have said this.
I mentioned money, right?
Thinking about the money. Don't you die for it. You're gonna live for it. Die for the money.
But people power resources. Just the people. I mean, to be able to have the people around to do the things that need to be done.
It's expensive to pay people for their craft. You can find a few people that might volunteer for you, but to keep things on a timeline, to keep things professional, you know, you have a release date, you're going towards the release date, but things come up because you're independent or you're doing everything by yourself. That team of people that you don't have to help you, so sometimes things just go slower.
I think right now the biggest obstacle is breaking through the clutter.
The biggest obstacle is obscurity. It's calling attention to what you're doing. In the mass of the thousands of people doing something similar, how do you stand out?
Il y a aussi évidemment une question de problème de diffusion, de disponibilité. Disponibilité de tes disques quand tu es indépendant puis tu vas être distribué, difficulté de faire diffuser ta musique sur les radios, évidemment on parle pas de la télé, des médias, difficulté dans une mer de monde de se positionner comme un artiste qu'il faut voir en spectacle absolument, tu sais.
The distribution channels are all controlled by a few small companies. And not only with the labels and their distribution chain, but now with the radio stations all being owned by the same people. They're all sort of in bed together. If you're not on, you know, this label, you're not going to get on the radio.
And it's still harder to get on the radio because they don't have the money, because it still takes money to get on commercial radio.
Definitely there's economic hardships, but I think on the flip side, it's how you're perceived.
Well, I think the major obstacle is still the stigma that, you know, because you're independent, that means you were kind of rejected.
A lot of the indie artists that I've interviewed, they say they still don't get the same respect.
Because sometimes people can look at you, say you're an indie artist, they just look at you, oh, you're desperate, or you need everything, you're so needy.
So I think it's just public to learn that this isn't second-class music or second-rate music. This is very good, often brilliant music.
Okay, that was great insight into the experience of being an indie artist, but it was a lot to take in. So let's just stop for a minute and recap the main points. Obstacles that were mentioned included money, lack of a team, limited radio play, stereotypes, and obscurity. Advantages of being indie were control, freedom, ownership of your music, experience, and going at one's own pace. Now, the overwhelming majority identify control and freedom as the main advantages of being indie. So, I think it's fair to say that these are essential to being indie and could help determine when an artist is truly independent. So going back to the spectrum, for argument's sake, let's disregard the major record labels and any independent labels owned or distributed by them. Now, if you're an artist on an indie label that's not affiliated with a major label in any way, that must mean you're indie, right?
One of the sort of inherent definitions of being independent is having control over the ownership of your art. That's the one thing that tends to come up when people want to define what independent is and want me to define it. I say, well, I can maintain the integrity behind everything that I do, from the fax that goes out all the way to the last note on the last song of the last show. But I have encountered artists who have been involved in independent label deals. So they've been indie artists signed to indie labels, and they've encountered the same problems that traditionally major label artists have encountered with major labels, which is not having control of their careers, feeling like their integrity is being compromised, that they've had to sacrifice too many of their ideals. In that case, I would suggest that that artist was not an indie artist.
Okay then. Ember raises a great point. Some indie labels operate with the same restrictive rules as the major labels. So, an artist might not have control and freedom in that situation, and you could argue that being on an indie label doesn't necessarily mean you're an indie artist. So what about being an unsigned artist? If you're not signed to any type of record label, does that automatically mean you're indie?
There is still a bit of an undertone that being an independent artist can mean being an unsigned artist. But perhaps more so in the last 5 years, there's been a division between independent artists who are definitely in a queue to become major label artists. So they're sort of independent by default, and then those independent artists who are independent by identity, and they're really proud of all that being independent means.
The basis of everything is personal integrity. This is why indie artists in waiting, or people that don't have a contract and are independent because nobody asked them to sign a contract, they're not really indie, because as soon as anybody, major label or anybody that's got a bit of cash, asks them to sign, they go, where, please, I want to sign. They're not really indie, they're just indie in waiting.
I think it's fundamentally a difference of philosophy. Do you believe that you control your future, you control your destiny, that you do not need anybody, and you are not waiting for anybody to come and do it for you, and you have conviction in your ability to manifest your future, if you will, versus somebody whose entire process, entire thought is geared towards that one person who will magically appear one day in a club, while they're waiting tables, while they're strolling down the street, and say, oh, wow, you're gorgeous. You know, let me make you into the next big star. It's the difference between being proactive and perhaps being reactive.
Indie, for some people, is a reaction more than
something that's proactive. I think if you're talking about indie, you have to make sure that you encompass values that are proactive. Otherwise, you're just saying rah rah indie, but you're not doing anything about it.
It's how you do your business. So if you're very proactive in your own career and you do, I'd say if you're very proactive, that's kind of what indie is about. It's about being proactive.
I guess this is another key aspect of being indie, being proactive. If you're unsigned, of course you have complete control. But if you're just waiting around to get signed, then are you truly independent? So does being indie have anything to do with whether you're on a record label or not?
Being independent has nothing to do with record label affiliation. I really think that it's an ethos that you have.
You can't just look at some statistic and say, oh, well, he's on a label, so therefore he's not independent. Or you can't just say, well, he has no label, so therefore he's independent. It really comes down to the mentality of it.
You know what? I would have to agree. So what is indie then? Panos mentioned an ethos. Derek talked about mentality. Has the concept of being indie evolved beyond the traditional definition?
In this big, big city, you know, it would take more than a wrecking crane.
Well, really, we feel the definition of indie to begin with has really changed and broadened over the last few years.
I think my perception of the word indie has gradually changed throughout the years. For me, it's come to mean somebody who's uncompromising, somebody who's in charge of their own destiny, somebody who I consider to be an entrepreneur in many ways, somebody who wakes up every morning and feels I am in control of my actions, the outcomes. I govern my own future.
I see indie as being more of a state of mind, more of a, a philosophy, an approach to life.
I would agree that it's a state of mind, it's an approach, it's a way of doing business, it's a way of being creative in situations that have not historically had as much room to be creative in.
I prefer to think of independent as a way of life.
C'est ici. C'est dans l'esprit. You know, I guess to me it's more an attitude than anything else. If you're still calling your own shots and going your own way.
Indie is a philosophy. It's a lifestyle. It's really DIY. To do it yourself.
I think independent is a philosophy because there are musicians who might still be independent, but all they want is a deal. They just want to get signed, man. They just want to be huge. They want to be millionaires. And then there are people that have even had a record deal and have 1 million fans, but they just want to be independent. They just want to do this on their own. They want to own their own material. So I think independent's really a philosophy. It doesn't matter where you're at. It matters where your head's at.
Now I think that's worth hearing one more time.
So I think independent's really a philosophy. It doesn't matter where you're at. It matters where your head's at.
Okay, I think we have something here. People talked about philosophy, about integrity, about freedom, control, and being proactive.
I'd say if you're very proactive.
After everything I had heard, there was no doubt in my mind that the traditional definition of what it means to be indie had changed. So how about this definition? Indie, short for independent, refers to a philosophy based on a proactive approach to one's career, retaining complete artistic control to maintain the integrity of one's art, regardless of record label affiliation. So, if being indie has nothing to do with record label affiliation, is it possible to be an indie artist while signed to a major record label?
Sorry? What?
Can I tell the truth now?
I like to plead the fifth.
Okay, I was just as shocked as anyone to even consider it, but if indie is a philosophy, then I think it's a legitimate question.
if an artist decides to sign a major label deal, are they somehow leaving their indie card at home and therefore defecting, or are they expatriates of the indie world? It's there's so many derogatory terms for people who sign deals. They left the fold.
I know people that are more independent, and they've got a contract for life with a major label, but they're independent in spirit.
I have seen indie artists who have, or heard about or read about indie artists who have signed deals that are amazing opportunities for them. They maintain ownership, they maintain control, they maintain the rights to every decision and the rights to veto every decision, and they feel well treated, and they don't feel like they're walking away from that deal having been used by a system. They feel, in fact, some artists walk away from those deals feeling like they've beat the system. Like, hey, I got this in the palm of my hand. I hired them. They didn't sign me to be their minion. I hired them to work for me on my behalf.
I think maybe you could, but I think you have to have worked as an independent artist in order to have any kind of control in that situation. If you can go in there saying, I know, because look, I've sold this many records and I have these people who adore me and whatever. If you could have that and then go into that kind of situation, then you maybe have more leverage to be on the same level and get more of what you want.
Gary Jules is a good example of an artist that was signed to Universal Music, but it was on his own terms. He had been putting out his album independently by himself, sold thousands of copies on his own. And so when Universal came calling, he basically said, these are my terms. I own my masters, I own this, I own that. If you want to put it out there to the world, let's talk. Let's see what you can do for me. And on his own terms, he signed a deal with Universal Music. So to me, that's an example of somebody who's on a major label, but is still, in my mind, independent. So again, it comes back to the philosophy.
And I think a lot of artists right now are holding on to this indie philosophy, which is like, you know, I'm going to hold on to the rights of my song. I'm going to really be staunch about what my songs are and how I'm presented to the world.
For example, like you can be, you know, when you think of an entrepreneur, you think of somebody who starts their own business and takes it out to the world. But you can also be an intrapreneur, which is somebody working within a larger company, but they have freedom within there to be an entrepreneur. And so you can have people signed to labels who are, you know, given the freedom to be who they are as artists, you know, and if you can find a place, no matter what it is, whatever context it is, to still remain creative and do your thing, then you're still indie even though you're signed, as it were.
You can be signed to a label and still have creative control and still have a wicked record deal, you know, if you have enough clout to negotiate that.
The key is to bring success to the table. The more you bring to the table, the less they could take away.
There's so many varying degrees, there's so many different types of contracts and different ways you can get support from a major label, whether it be distribution, just to get your stuff out to those major distributors, record stores, or promotion, just to have your face seen a little bit more. Anything that an indie artist needs, they can get that pull or that support from a major.
So I think that being an independent artist is somewhat fluid, and I think that there is room for independence regardless of who you're negotiating with and regardless of what you're negotiating.
And it's kind of like being a vegetarian. You could be a vegetarian and eat fish. You could be a vegetarian and eat chicken, even though that's pushing it a little bit, but people still consider you to be a vegetarian, right? So
I'm one of those.
If you can negotiate something that's good for you and good for your career, why not? You know, don't be dogmatic about it. You know, don't be an indie dickhead. You know, like.
As long as you're in firm control and you can work out some kind of negotiated contract with whoever, be it with yourself or with the company, that you're at the top of the heap. And if you can swing that, fine. And if the powers that be won't let that be, then fuck them.
All right, couldn't have said that better myself. Now, being an indie artist while signed to a major label is pretty rare. But to me, the fact that it's even happening is a sign of profound change in the music industry. So how did this happen? How did we get to the point where indie artists can have the power to dictate terms to major labels and walk away if they don't get what they want?
In the history of the music industry, as we know it, the modern music industry, there's been three phases. The first phase in the 40s and 50s, I call the music-driven phase. You know, entrepreneurs heard music coming out of bars and different places in the street, and they responded, and they put labels together, and it was like the heyday of the independent labels, right? And so it was, but it was music driven. And then, you know, as rock ascended and began selling in great numbers, they needed to impose a bureaucracy and organizational structure on things more. And so that was the ascendancy of the lawyers and accountants that kind of became the leadership, you know, of the music industry. And so then it shifted from being a music-driven industry to being a business-driven industry, with bottom line being, you know, pretty much the bottom line. And then, you know, in the 90s, we began seeing the shift subtly early in the 90s, but then really it's picking up steam in the latter part of the decade, where it became now a market-driven industry. It's spawning so much great music, but the market's driving it. The consumer is now in the driver's seat and is basically saying what they want and what they don't want. But now that it's market-driven, you know, it's a whole new ball game.
The way that the people are accessing music, the way that people are connecting with the content that is relevant to them, has completely changed and will continue to change as technology takes hold. For every movement to take hold, every revolution that's ever happened, there's always a catalyst. There's always something. It's that match that lights that spark that contributes to that revolution. And if you ask me, the match that is lighting that spark of today's independent music is technology. It's the single biggest and most important thing that has happened to the music industry, you know, the past 10 years. It's not just affecting your artistic vision and your ability to produce it and get it out there as cheaply and as close as possible to that voice that you have in your head. But from a business angle, your ability to produce it cheap, distribute it cheap, market it cheap, and reach perhaps more people than any physical product would have ever dreamed of being able to reach is just mind-blowing. It's fundamentally changing the whole concept of what is the music business.
One of the best examples of technology changing the industry and giving more power to indie artists is the rise of CD distribution over the internet. The leader in this field is cdbaby.com, an online record store that sells CDs for independent artists. At the time this film was made, CD Baby had over 118,000 artists on their site and had paid over $22 million directly to these artists for CD sales. That's $22 million paid to indie artists. Technology has also spawned the digital distribution of music through services like iTunes. The sales of downloaded music by iTunes have now surpassed those of some of the largest traditional music retailers. So given the changes in the industry, what does the future hold for independent artists?
Public mind.
They're going to rule. Indies are going to rule. What's going to happen, my personal opinion, and I've heard it from other really big people in the major label system, eventually the major labels are going to be the distributors. They are going to be the distributors, because even now, more and more indies that are getting deals with the labels are becoming more partnerships. It's not about artist deals so much anymore. We're learning, indies are learning that you don't have to sacrifice everything. You can call the shots, get your career going first, and then you have control over what you're not desperate. You can say, hey, I want this and this and this, or goodbye. So they're getting more of a partnership type of deal where the major label distributes, they use some of their means to promote the music, but the artist still maintains a lot of the control.
I think it's taking over. And the independent movement has various gradations. It's not like it's all independent. I think you have your old school independents that are thinking in a very different way, that are all about, I'm anti-major. I'm defining my sense of existence by simply being against somebody else. But then to me, there's another school of independent thought, and that is I don't even care. You're not even part of my everyday existence. I don't even acknowledge that you exist because you're not part of my plan. And to me, that's what scares major labels more than anything else, that artists are no longer relying on them to get that voice out there.
I like that bit of film history that somebody told me, that in the 1940s, 50s, that actors were signed to a studio. That, you know, Frank Sinatra is signed to MGM or something, and he was only allowed to do MGM pictures. And then it was a big deal if he was signed away to another studio, and then he was only allowed to work with that studio's productions. And then it's like, now, it's only 50 years later, or I mean, 20 years later, that just became some bit of ancient history. Like, wow, remember the days when people were signed? It's like the actors realized that they had the power, they had all the leverage, and it was harming them to be signed. It's better to do these one-on-one deals. So I think that's going to happen with music, that the whole idea of being signed will be gone.
Today, because of very smart indies, very smart indie artists, they are showing themselves to be very capable of creating success for themselves in the real world. And that's real exciting stuff, and that's changing the whole definition of what's indie.
Right now, there's this shift and there's this instability, and the major labels are freaking out.
Their opportunity, their time of thriving is over. And now, you know, there's a shift. And people's tastes in music have diversified tremendously. And the indies feed that appetite more than any major label could.
Why did you chase me so? Why did you? I'm a foolish girl.
I don't know. I'm not much of a prophet. But right now, at this point, I think this is the renaissance of the indie musician.
After spending more than a year of my life making this film and meeting so many incredible artists and people on the cutting edge of the music industry, my perception of what it means to be indie completely changed. I think if someone were to ask me today what being indie means, I would tell them, yeah, indie is a philosophy. It's about integrity, freedom, and taking control of your career. But more than anything, I would tell them that indie is the future of the music industry.
You got your gun, and you want revolution. But brother, come on down, cause you got one, you got one. I'd rather go out fighting. Yes, I'm a revolutionary. Can let things stay as they are. I'm the traded one. I'd rather go out fighting. Yes, I'm a revolutionary. Let things stay as they are. Well, I can't stand the pressure. No, I can't stand the pain. Don't like your malfunction. Everywhere it's the same. I want a revolution just to free up my brain, to change the situation. Brother, can we stop the rain? I'd rather go out fighting. I'm a revolutionary. Let things stay as they are. I'm a dreaded one. Them call you a soldier. A number is your name. We don't want you on ya. Suck the sugar from a cane. Let's stop this confusion, cause it's weak and it's lame. Let's find a solution. Brother, can we stop the rain? I'd rather go